Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Taylor Stewart, and I'm the president of the Biology Society here at Salem State. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce our speaker, Karen Romano Young, an esteemed science writer, illustrator, and deep sea diver. With a passion for both science and art, Karen's carved a unique niche for herself in the world of science communication. Her journey into this realm focuses on the intersection of science and storytelling. Armed with her biology background and artistic talents, she embarked on a mission to make science accessible and engaging to audiences of all ages. Throughout her illustrious career, Karen has captivated readers with insightful writing and enlightening illustrations, from children's books exploring the wonders of the natural world to articles delving into cutting-edge scientific research. Her work spans a wide range of topics and audiences. Her ability to distill complex scientific concepts into engaging narratives has earned her widespread acclaim and recognition. As we gather here today to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the Darwin Festival, it's fitting that we welcome her to present Science Superpowers, Not What You Think. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Karen Romano Young, a true pioneer in the field of science communication.
Thank you, Taylor. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen and go on chatting at you. And while I do that, if you would grab something to write with and a few pieces of paper, we're going to be doing some drawing during this session, and I want you to be ready to join. Okay, so this is me. A couple of drawings of myself and where to find me. And this is me and somebody who ought to be familiar to you. If you go to the Galapagos Islands, you will see an awful lot of images of this guy. He has had a big influence on the Galapagos Islands and on the sciences as a researcher and as a writer. There are not that many people who do both, but Charles Darwin is definitely one of them and had a big impact. This book that you see on the right, Galapagos Islands, is my newest book. It will not actually be out till June, though you can pre-order it. Galapagos Islands, the World's Living Laboratory, not only in terms of Darwinian science, but in terms of today and how we're handling living as people. So there's a lot more about Galapagos that are humans, as well as all of the animals and plants that Darwin shined a light on. Shined a light on? I'm not too sure as a writer. Let's go forward. So I'm a children's author and illustrator. I have a degree in education, and I started my career at Scholastic News, which is that little magazine that you used to get on your desk in your classroom that gave you news. During that time, I had to interview everyone the first day at work. We had to call NASA and we had to call the White House, which is, I guess, the scariest people that they could come up with. But we had to interview sports stars and film stars and politicians and authors and scientists. And I very quickly snarfed all the science gigs because I realized that I liked talking to scientists the most. They were excited about everything that they were doing. They were grateful to have somebody writing about their work, and they were patient with me as I tried to understand what they were doing. I had a limited but rich science background, mostly based in experience, very little formal science education. And what I did just kind of by the skin of my teeth, by pushing myself in doorways, literally. These are some of the books that I've come up with, and you can see that there is more nonfiction than fiction and more ocean science than anything else, although I'm interested in a great many things. This is what my studio looks like when it's neat and well cared for, which is very small percentage of the time. Lots going on all the time. I am a visual person. I don't do well with files in drawers. I need to have everything out where I can see it. And visuals are really important to me for more reasons than that. I just like pretty pictures. I tell a lot of stories through pictures. And this is just one example of one. I chose this as something to introduce the idea of Antarctica, which I'm going to be talking about next. and placing it in the center, which is really where it should be, not at the bottom of your globe with that screw thing going through it. Or on some globes, if you take a look, it doesn't even bother putting Antarctica on there. It's just like this blank space at the bottom. But since we have really just one ocean, not 7 seas or 4 oceans or whatever people say, it's really all connected. This might be what it looked like if we placed Antarctica at the center. It's all in the way you look at things. I start off with an O, and that brings me to our first drawing exercise. Would you please very quickly draw a cat? And so that we're not just sitting here with dead air, while you're drawing, I'll read you a lovely poem. Go right ahead and draw your cat, please. Why you should carry 2 pens. Be told the mind is not your friend. Business like you stride along while your mind snuffles beside the path, distracted by odors and ghosts. It brings you sticks, burrito wrappers, bones, baby rabbits, a new idea. You feel you ought to write it down, but you're late for work or nearly home, or feel pretentious stopping to write, and your mind says, I'll remember that. Those words are the sound forgetting makes deep in the basement of your brain. They're the creaking hinge on the trap door above the alligators. You have 30 seconds to write down your good idea before it's gone forever. Yet it can be worse. I couldn't forget that. Means you have 10 seconds, tops. Go grab a pen from a stranger. Write it on your hand, your shirt, the baby. Everything goes sooner or later. Save what you can. In the dark, the alligators doze. That's by Susan Ramsey, published in Smartish Place. So, we're going to stay on this for a second. If you have drawn a cat, you may have one of the following feelings. You may feel that you are the world's greatest artist and that no one could fail to recognize that your drawing was a cat. You may be the world's worst artist and maybe at best have drawn a round something with 2 little triangles attached. And if you were thinking carefully, maybe an S-shaped tail of it. What I want you to notice is how you felt drawing when you got to something that you weren't sure what it looked like, or weren't sure of your ability to recreate what it looked like. And we'll come back to this, but for now we're going to Antarctica. Palmer Station on the Antarctic Peninsula. If you were to hold your left hand up with your fingers in a fist and your thumb pointing upward to represent the Antarctic Peninsula, and your knuckles representing the Transantarctic Mountains, Palmer Station is out on the end of your thumb. Well, not quite on the end, but it's out there. Really 1,000 or more miles or kilometers from just about anywhere you could come up with. What was I doing there? I was there on an Antarctic Artist and Writers Program grant from the National Science Foundation. And I was there with a team of scientists who were studying invisible stuff, phytoplankton in the ocean that required a microscope to look at it. And they hired me to draw invisible stuff and to try to convey their science to the general public as part of that famous broader impacts part of their National Science Foundation grant. So I drew everything that I could see and a whole lot of things that I couldn't see. More drawing I'm requesting from you now. Would you please draw an alligator any way possible? And please this time notice your feelings as you're drawing. When you get to the part where you don't know what it looks like, you can fake it or you can leave it blank, but either way, notice that part because that's what scientists do. Pay attention to what they don't know. And I'll read you a poem again so we don't have too much quiet. The diver's clothes lying empty. You are sitting here with us, but you're also out walking in a field at dawn. You are yourself the animal we hunt when you come with us on the hunt. You are in your body like a plant is solid in the ground, yet you are wind. You are the diver's clothes lying empty on the beach. You are the fish. In the ocean are many bright strands and many dark strands, like veins that are seen when a wing is lifted up. Your hidden self is blood in those veins that are lute strings that make ocean music, not the sad edge of surf, but the sound of no shore. And that's by Rumi, translated by Coleman Banks. This is Palmer Station, and a photograph I took from the back of the LM Gould, which was our transport boat that took us to the Antarctic Peninsula. I didn't have any idea what I was looking at. I could tell that there were fuel tanks. I could tell that there were boats. I could tell that there were buildings and antenna, and that's about as far as I got. So I began to draw it. This is what I do when I get into a new situation or into a new place. And I really know how you might have felt drawing the alligator when you got to whatever part it was that puzzled you. The tail, the teeth, those bumps on the end of its snout. I don't know, whatever. I don't think, even though I've thought about drawing alligators a lot, that I could just draw one and have it look really recognizable. How do the feet go? When I get to a new situation in science, because I haven't had a huge background, I really have to call into use my superpowers, and I will quantify that superpower a little bit further on, but you may be getting the idea of what it might be. I am working very hard to get myself comfortable in a place where I may or may not feel like a total ignoramus. I find myself in that place a lot, and drawing is often my answer to it. Duh. Use your ignorance. That's what scientists do. I took my black and white drawing and I walked around the whole thing. It's only about as big as a small town. It's much smaller than your college campus. And it has a few buildings. It has about 50 people. I talked to everyone there about who they were, what they were doing, what went on in their building, how long they'd been there, what's the name of every boat, where does this pipe go, what's this little shed for out here, what are the names of the mountains in the background? Are they mountains or are they glaciers? How do you tell the difference? What are the animals that are in the water that you can't see? What are the birds that are flying by and I don't know what they are? All of these things made it into this piece of art that became a poster that's actually now still down at Palmer Station. But this is how I use what I don't know. I really figure out what I don't know, and I go and find out as much as I can. O plus da goes do. Another animal for you to draw, please. Anything you want, really anything you want. But don't, well, actually, you're going to draw as many parts as you can, but you're not going to actually name them snout or tail or claws or paws or whatever they are. Instead, you're going to name them for their function. Okay? Questions are mysteries, clues lead to solutions. See what your questions are and see if you can answer it with what you already know or have observed about this animal. And once again, I will regale you with a beautiful poem. Last August hours before the year 2000, spun silk of mercy, long-limbed afternoon, sun urging purple blossoms from baked stems. What better blessing than to move without hurry under trees, lugging a bucket to the rose that became a twining house by now, roof and walls of vine. You could live inside this rose. Pouring a slow stream around the ancient pineapple crowned with spiky fruit, I thought we would feel old by the year 2000. Walt Disney thought cars would fly. What a drama to keep thinking the last summer, the last birthday before the calendar turns to zeros. My neighbor says anything we plant in September takes hold. She's lining pots of little grasses by her walk. I want to know the root goes deep on all that came before. You could lay a soaker hose across your whole life and know there was something under layers of packed summer earth and dry blown grass to moisten. Naomi Shihab Nye. So how did you do with labeling your animals? This is the part of the webinar where I would really love to be able to open it up and hear what people answer, because they answer such genius, such funny things when asked to simply describe the function of the body part of an animal or of a person. And once again, when you go into a new situation as a scientist or as a human being, and you see something that you don't know, is it necessary to feel shaky? Is it necessary to feel like an ignoramus? Or can you turn it around and say, my question will lead me forward to new research. My question will lead me forward to new knowledge. Part of what I've had to do, an enormous part of what I've had to do in turning my non-scientist self into a science writer who could turn around and explain things to children or to the general public, or even to other scientists, God help me, was to embrace my discomfort with what I did not know and to see it as the horizon to where I might get to. Now you know what my superpower is. I bet you thought the D stood for doodling, but it stands for duh. That sinking feeling that no matter how fascinated, thrilled, or engaged I am, I just don't get it. Don't really understand. Not the way Pete, Patty, or Carlton does. Those are the team of scientists that I accompanied to Palmer Station. Not enough to be a scientist, but maybe enough for me. So please share with me in science, what makes you feel a bit dumb? So I have a regular science comic that came out of my trips to Antarctica called Antarctic Log. It has to do with climate change, with climate research, with anything to do with Antarctica, the Arctic, or any place where climate research is taking place, as well as education, activism, policy that has to do with it. And when I put this comic out in the summer of 2018, I got many, many responses. I don't know who reads this comic. Kids do, parents, apparently some PhD scientists, because they wrote to me all kinds of different really wonderful things. I will show you the resulting comic in a few more images, but I'm going to share a few of my really big duh moments. Duh, not dough. I was on a ship in the Arctic and I was sitting next to this guy whose name is Sam Laney, and he's a biologist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And this machine was down in the basement, down in the hull of our ship. And I sat looking at it, and that was a big duh moment. But I started to really say, okay, don't wig out. Think about what you can see. What do you know by looking at this? And I could see that there was a pump involved, that there was water coming through the hull and somehow channeling through this machine, that there was a laser in there someplace. And by sitting next to Sam up in the lab, I could see that what he was looking at was phytoplankton, diatoms, all kinds of stuff that was going by. And he would just sit there very calmly. And every once in a while, he'd say, well, that's a such and such. Well, I have no idea what that is. And it was just an amazing thing, because when he started explaining it to me, eventually, I found out that it was Okay, a machine that pumped water past a laser and the laser could identify something solid going by, even if it was microscopic, and it could blow it up so he could see it on his screen. And that he was just watching the water flow and using his knowledge of phytoplankton to figure out what he was seeing. And over, he was seeing things that he didn't have any idea what they were. And he was happier with every time a new one came by because he was making discoveries. Fantastic. So I have this perfect model sitting next to me of somebody who's experiencing this great big duh, and it's the happiest moment of his life. And I really tried to take that on board and say, okay, this is what happens. This is how we move forward from the known to the unknown. I'm not going to ask you to do this, but I share this with you because when I do work with artists, and by that I mean kids who are considering moving into science and art fields and who love both but aren't really sure what they're going to do, to start off drawing an animal, start off with what you already know about it, that you're excited to tell us, and then figure out what you don't know, because that's going to give you your pathway to go forward. Kids sit in classrooms all the time being asked to write reports, being asked to write essays, and sitting there going, I don't know what to write about, without actually going through the process that scientists go through when they're trying to figure out what they want to study about, what they want to research about. You got to walk right up to the line of where you're uncomfortable, where you don't know something, and figure out what it is. And by this time, if we've gone through all of these different drawing exercises as a classroom, they've started to embrace what they don't know, to look for it and to write it down, and not to care that they don't know something, and not to feel stupid about it, but to go off looking for the new thing and to be ready to report back. This is a really good, strong starting point for anyone, whether they're a scientist or whether they're a kid who wants to draw or to learn about new things. I drew this thing on another ship aboard Nautilus. This is a remotely operated vehicle called Hercules. And when I first drew it, it looked kind of like that picture of Palmer Station. It was just all black lines. Nothing was labeled. I didn't know what anything was. But again, as with Sam Laney's machine, I could look at this machine and say, okay, well, that's a camera. Well, that's a light. Well, that's a pipe or a hose. So there must be something liquid going through it. Those are obviously claws that can reach down and pick something up. And I don't know why the claws are different shapes, but I know about crabs, and I know a crab has one claw that it picks up something, and the other one that it pulls the meat out of whatever it is. And so I started to figure things out. I didn't know things like, why is there a little penguin on this? Or why is there a little tiki statue? And when I took this drawing with none of the labels to some of the engineers that were aboard the ship and began to ask them questions, I found out what all the stuff was, and also found out some of the lore behind Hercules, such as that the person who is the youngest or the lowest status aboard any ship has to oil the tiki before it dives, such that one of the people who is involved in studying deep ocean vents also studies Antarctica, because that's where extremophile organisms live, both of those two places. And that's why there was a penguin on this ROV that is set up to go down to the deep ocean. So once again, I'm having a good time. I'm getting to do art. I'm getting to do writing. I'm getting to talk to scientists, and I'm embracing my duh and turning it into a doe or an O. What's so great about drawing? I think I've already made some of it clear, how it can really help you to figure out what's going on. But here are a few more examples. This is actually the algae scientist that I was just talking to you about, Thea. This is Sabrina Heiser. And she's a diver in Antarctica. And I said, how do you do this? What are you wearing? How are you surviving these cold temperatures? What are you looking for? And Sabrina went through her whole outfit and told me every single thing that she was wearing. And, I found it very exciting to label everything, to draw everything, and then to turn around and share it. And you will too, if you employ this method for doing some research. And so will any artist or writer, including your kids and your students. I did a comic series for a children's magazine called Odyssey. For 4 years, this was in print before moving on to mostly digital stuff. It was always about um, research that was being done on a particular animal or on a particular situation. And what I found out about it really quickly, even though the drawings look somewhat childish or like something that would appeal to a child, there's a lot going on just a sheet of paper. Everything from a human experience with a pet that has had an encounter with a wild animal to a title that looks like the wild animal. There's behavior here, there's physiology here. There is a chart that shows all the different species. There is mention of a person who studies skunks for a living and his experiences raising baby skunks. There is an awful lot of material that can be shared through just drawing and labeling. And it's a lot easier than writing a report. And it's a lot more interesting to read than a report. So I have embraced this method and I've taught it to a lot of teachers who sit in workshops and do them themselves and fall in love and then turn around and share it with their kids. Here's some of the results. This one may look simple and it may look like it's not just about any one animal. She decided to write about a whole lot of different things. But in every cell of this comic, there's something that I didn't know. I don't know what cave slime is. I don't know what an ohm is. I'm not sure I know whether or not sea slugs can make chlorophyll when they hatch from their shells. It's their shells, their eggs. But this kid's figuring it out by going along, and she's not the least bit worried by her blank spaces of her paper, as you might sometimes be freaked out by having a blank page that you're supposed to write on. This one has a lot of blank space. And you might think, oh, well, this child did not finish it all. But look at all the information that's here. Not only have you got information about all of the shark's physiology, but you've got the Latin name, you've got the common name, you've got weight. And I bet that this kid knows what he's going to write about next because he's experienced all of this. May not be finished, but there's a lot going on, and he knows where his unknown is, and he knows what story he wants to tell. This one's about Dumbo octopus and about other things that live in the deep ocean. If you just scan over this, you see so much information from the shades of the octopus, its morphology, what different colors it might come in, to, again, the Latin name, and to how they named it, and to who named it, and to who researched it, and why she got the privilege of naming it, on, as well as little jokes and little puns, which are so helpful in education. Be an expert talking about octopus eggs, and so on, like that. And that they're all waiting on the baby O's to be born. Just cute, just funny. By creating a comic, she can really put some of her personality into her work. And it's not just a dry report that anyone could have, copied or written on their own. Anyone else who wrote about a Dumbo octopus would probably have come up with a very different page of work, don't you think? Another one that is much more aligned with our earlier assignment of trying to match up the parts of an animal with their function, as well as finding out what they're called, but really looking at them first and figuring out what they do. I think that it's worth mentioning that MIT has a freshman course in doodling. in order to really establish whether the doodles that scientists are making are representing the science concepts that they're trying to portray. They did a study first where they went around to science conferences and picked up all the napkins after the cocktail session that scientists had been scribbling on to explain themselves to one another. And then they went back to the scientists and said, what were you trying to do? What were you trying to show? And found that very often their drawings really didn't represent very well, and that they could harness this as a way of communicating better to themselves. And I think they wound up with some good outreach pieces or education pieces at the same time. This is from a professional doodler of all things named Sunny Brown, one of those people who goes into conferences and doodles what everyone's talking about on the wall. And she talks about some of the research that's been done with drawing and people who are allowed to or encouraged to draw while trying to learn. And here are some of the things that come out of drawing, being encouraged to draw, being encouraged to find out what you don't know through drawing, and then applying it to your writing. So back to Antarctica. This is the cover of my last book, Antarctica, the Melting Continent. Not illustrated by me, illustrated by the wonderful Angela Shea, who actually put me in the book drawing, which is what I was down there to do. I cut my hair since then. This is my drawing of when I was trying to understand this vast backpack thing full of clothing that we were issued when we were going to Antarctica. What do we need all these clothes for? I cataloged not only our science team, Patty Matrai, Carlton Rauschenberg, and Pete Countway from the Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences in Maine, but everything that we all had been issued to wear. Figuring out when we would need to wear it was a different matter altogether, but that was the next piece of, that was the next horizon, right? And Angela used me once again and some of these drawings to show how we get ready to go outside in Antarctica in all the different situations. That's in this book. Here we all are going out in all our stuff to work in the kind of weather that you picture Antarctica having. It was always foggy on the ocean. We couldn't always see everything, including the massive icebergs. But we had time to pose for hero shots. This is Pete Countway, who was our fearless leader, studying the phytoplankton. And this is a video showing Pete and me doing what we did when we went out to gather water. So, as I said, we were gathering invisible stuff. We were gathering phytoplankton from 5 meters down, and we were bringing it back on shore and putting it into this machine that was assembled by us at Palmer Station called an echostat machine. One of the reasons that I was there was because Patty, the scientist shown in the middle, got too seasick to handle working on that small boat. So that was part of my job. So the echostat was set up to rock the water. It rocked the water and was in the sunlight and in the temperature that the ocean water was in, so that they could see over time what the phytoplankton did, what their life cycle was. So this is what it looks like, and it's outside. Here we are. This is my my drawing of our process in grabbing it, and the bottom left should look familiar from that video. And I figured out how to draw it from the ocean point of view in the middle bottom. We would pull the water back into these big carboys and bring it back into our lab. And this is the echostat being set up. And long past this point, once the phytoplankton have gone through their life cycle, Pete was doing RNA analysis on them inside the lab there. That's Pete. I was filtering the water before that. I realized I have this somewhat out of order, but I would filter the water so that you got mostly the water out of it and left the phytoplankton in. And then Pete was doing the RNA analysis on it to find out what it was doing. And I was drawing, again, all of the equipment, all of the situation where we got the water from and where we got the phytoplankton from and when it's all happening. And then at the very end of it, here's Penguin Pete with his little suitcase carrying his samples back to the lab in Maine that I have labeled and carefully put all the filters inside so that he can do all of his analysis. So this is how we draw invisible comics of invisible stuff. This was my desk at Palmer Station, just doing a lot of artwork, plugging along a lot of magic markers and things and drawing everything. I took another trip the following year, more invisible stuff. Not only was it invisible, but it was ancient and we had to go to great efforts to bring it in. This time we didn't go anywhere close to shore. We were 100 miles out in the Amundsen Sea from the Thwaites Glacier, the so-called Doomsday Glacier, which we know melted about 10,000, 13,000 years ago. And by drilling up sediment from the shore, from the seafloor, we could tell what had happened to the Thwaites Glacier in earlier times. We could do that by using a drill. This is the Joides Resolution, which was an oil ship that's been recommissioned as a research ship. That derrick in the middle, the big tower, supports the sending down of a huge noodle of pipe that goes all the way down into the sea floor and brings up sediment. So you can see the Thwaites Glacier off to the left, and we've come down off the peninsula and onto the shelves of West Antarctica. Here comes the core that has been drilled up, but not for a few days. First, we had to get there. And while we were getting there, I was confronted by a real duh moment of, I don't really know what they're doing with this sediment. There's this huge lab here. Don't really know what they're going to do, what all these people's different roles are. They're all telling me I'm a magnetic paleontologist, I'm a microbiologist, I'm a this, I'm a that. And I'm going, okay, well, what does all that have to do with all this different sediment? The answer came, this is what they would do when they got the core. They would be describing it as they said what they were doing, doing all kinds of testing on it, doing all kinds of, I don't know, like what I said, testing or something on it. I don't know what they're going to do. Not really. But it was my lucky day because someone had given me a fruitcake. Recently, a fruitcake had been found in Shackleton's hut near McMurdo Base, another research station in Antarctica. It was 100 years old exactly, and still edible, apparently. And this friend who is another science writer named Leslie Bullion made me a fruitcake and said, you've got to take this to Antarctica. They need a new one. So we decided that fruitcake had a lot in common with sediment, that it was kind of muddy looking and it had things in it, and that people might be able to use it not only to explain what they were going to be looking for in the sediment, but to actually use the fruitcake as a model for them all learning their own roles in the lab. So we made a core fruitcake. And we put fruitcake on a slide and looked at it under the microscope. And we matched its color, which tells a lot to them about what they're looking at. And then I made a comic about the fruitcake. I made a four comic showing all the different things that they were going to be looking at, from density to core matrix colors, to a smear slide, to clasts, to all kinds of new vocabulary that I didn't know because of finding out something through using what I did not know. The superpower again. So back to the superpower idea, what makes you feel dumb? People responded, the metric system, chemistry, math, genetics, period, metagenomics, DNA, photosynthesis, electricity. How does the telephone work? Airplanes, flight, all these different things. And finally, someone just said to me, I feel dumb around science almost every day that is. I feel barely smart enough to discover the boundaries of my ignorance, which is a necessary first step to knowledge. Then I started thinking about what made me feel particularly dumb when I was a kid. And it was that question that they always ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I thought, I don't really know. I know what I'm interested in, but I don't have any idea what that leads to. And the combination of my dumbness about that and scientists telling me that there weren't enough perspectives in science, that people were too much the same, but that the world is very different, and that if we could get more different people into the sciences, it would be better. So I created this project called I Was a Kid to talk to scientists about what they were like as kids and to really seek out people who represented underrepresented communities or groups and to portray them in such a way that kids who represented those communities would feel welcome. For example, Catalina Martinez. This is what a page of the I Was a Kid website looks like. There is a big comic that is a lot of her thoughts about how she got to be where she is, from being a little kid, a Cuban immigrant living in Providence, Rhode Island, with a bunch of cousins and not very much money, and how she got to be not only an expert on diversity, but a research scientist in her own right. And she is sitting on top of that submarine, that with the ROV, pardon me, the submersible Hercules that we saw earlier, because they're going to go and use that for some diving. So I Was a Kid uses audio, photographs of children so that they can identify with them, comics, as well as, here's the comic again, the big comic, as well as text and a signpost that shows the different turning points along Catalina's path, and then in text, how she handled each one. There's also a try this section where she talks about programs and opportunities that she took advantage of when she was a kid, or that as today, as an adult, she's been part of creating so that kids on their way up can have something to participate in. So each of the close to 50 people now on the I Was a Kid website is represented with this kind of portrait. Here are a few more, and I included Bridget because she is an artist as well. That's my signal to wrap it up, so I will. Here are some of the many different childhood photographs of the people who are involved in I Was a Kid. Some of their roles now. Some of them are students, some of them are teachers, some of them are artists, some of them are doctors, PhDs, graduate students, undergrads, all the different disciplines that I can come up with so far. It was a fantasy dream, but I made it a reality. Is a young man, single father of 3, Kyle Zani, a Navajo man who was an intern at JPL. And the point of all of this is to change the way that kids draw scientists, the way that they consider their own futures and their own potential to go into the scientist and contribute their ignorance and then their knowledge to the fields. And I will flash through a couple of when they've seen I was a kid, the inspiration that kids have had to go out and find the people who are working in the sciences in their own circles, their families, their friends, or to talk about people in history who represent minorities, to really say, everybody's here and everybody has a place here. And just a few more snapshots of those folks. Be curious and open-minded and willing to learn and grow. And I hope that you can be, and I hope that you will not criticize yourself for your dumb moments and go off to find your smart ones. Thank you so much. I need to figure out how to escape now. Okay.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to kick off the questions. And the first question from our audience is, were you always artistic growing up? Did you want to do something that utilized your art skills?
I was. I liked to draw. I wouldn't ever have described myself as artistic. However, there comes a time in every life when you look around at everyone else and somebody's a better artist than you, so you quit, right? And you start saying, I'm not creative, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to do this. What I found out as I've gone on and went away from drawing completely for years, maybe 20 years, and then came back to it one Sunday afternoon when I was just kind of sick of myself and started drawing whatever was around me and thought, okay, that was not so bad. Let me try that every Sunday for a while. And after a while, started feeling like I wanted to draw something to go with one of the stories that I was working on. I think it's important to forgive yourself, and I think it's important to recognize that we're all somewhere on a continuum. You know, I might not be as good as you, but you might not be as good as me. And there might be different ways of looking at this and different ways of being good. So I have tried to encourage myself and keep on going and not get too upset about where I have not been able to go yet.
Aaron, thanks for a very interesting talk. I discovered that I'm better at drawing cats than crocodiles. Another question. So we have some teachers in the room, including us university teachers. Where could we find information about your workshops?
On KarenRomanoYoung.com.
All right, great. Thanks. I'll pass it back to Thea.
Okay, Karen, this is wonderful, but what strategies do you suggest for faculty who are hopeless when it comes to drawing? How can I use this powerful method that I can't really demonstrate? So pleased to see and hear you today, Irv Levy Ludlow, 76. Ludlow, excuse me.
Oh my gosh. Hi, Irv. Irv is one of my dear friends when I was in high school, and I haven't heard from him in a while. That's so funny. How can you apply this to how you can't draw? Okay. Irv, I happen to know that you can play the piano and sing, so there's going to be something that you can do to convey this. You know, I've been talking about art and my drawing, but why not make it funny? And I know you know how to do that too. And why not make a song about it? All of these things that might make people laugh or see something in a different way can be useful. I also don't think it's important that you know how to draw. Remember the whole the thing about drawing the body parts without knowing what they were. If you were doing that with a human, you would just draw a stick figure and it wouldn't matter a bit. You know, it doesn't matter if the hand looks all beautiful or, you know, you could just draw sticks like that. And I don't think that it really matters. It is my way of looking at things. It is my pathway to finding out what I don't know. But all you're really trying to come up with is the questions. I mean, I could have just sat and stared at Sam Laney's machine in the hull of the ship and then gone back to him and said, look, I can tell it has something to do with light and water, but what's the light doing with the water? And, you know, it's a way of shaping your questions. That's all. But of drawing, I have to say, as with music, as with anything that you do to try to create a connection with people, can open the door to asking those questions and make them see you in a different way and not just somebody hanging around their lab trying to figure out what they're doing. Ask the questions, have the conversation. I'll tell you one thing that I learned in my early days of Scholastic, which is that there's nobody who likes to talk about their work more than scientists because there's nobody who gets asked less about it. So open the door to those conversations, then they will come through. Love you, Irv.
Karen, another question for you. Can you tell us more about your upcoming book about the Galapagos Islands?
Sure. Thank you so much. The books that I write tend to come out of my experience. I was getting on a ship on the Nautilus that Hercules was on in the Galapagos Islands, and I was supposed to just fly in and get on a plane. I mean, fly in on a plane, get on a boat and leave. And I said, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I took one of the little tours and just found it to be an extraordinary place, not only in the obvious things of tortoises and the landscape and volcanoes and everything, but just in the way that people talked about it. I was fascinated that our tour guide was required to be a native-born Galapagos in order to talk about it, and that that had not always been the case. I was interested to hear that they were trying to get Galapagos education into their schools, even though they're part of Ecuador. They didn't just have to learn Ecuadorian history anymore, which was all they used to have. So you had kids who lived on these islands who couldn't swim, who'd never been off the island to look back at it, who didn't know what lived in the water, and weren't in any position to grow up and husband it all, steward it properly. And so they've tried to change that. And it's been really interesting to me to see what happens in a place where they really are trying not only to control things and to keep things sustainable, but to maybe inspire other places to create a relationship with the people who live there.
Thank you.
I have another comment and question. Wonderful presentation. When
Thank you.
growing up, did you experience nature in some ways with your family, like going on hikes, camping, biking, canoeing? Just wondering because you seem to have a deep appreciation of nature.
That's nice. Thank you. I literally grew up on the beach. We grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, and there was a Long Island Sound beach there. And my mother would take us there at 8 in the morning and not take us home till 11 o'clock at night. And when we went on vacation, we always went back to where she had gone on vacation as a child herself, which was Ocean City, Maryland. One of the first things that I learned as a kid was how to tell what tide it was. I always knew whether it was going in or out. I always knew what moon it was because we were always at the beach when the moon was rising, or why is it really dark? Because it's a new moon. So a lot of just experiencing everything. But I also lived right down this street from a river, and we were just, we were kind of feral, and we were out in the river all the time and walking on the ice when we shouldn't have been, and walking in the water in February to see if we could survive it, and all this kind of thing. And I met a woman who named Joy Shaw, who still is in Fairfield, living in the old mill, and who took it upon herself to teach every fifth grader in our town of Fairfield about our river, all the way from its source to Long Island Sound. And that's where my interest in science came from, was those two experiences. Like I said, I had little formal science education. I didn't have a formal science class till I was in 6th grade. And I was significantly behind at that age, behind enough that when I went to junior high, they tracked me low. And it made me mad because I knew that I was higher in math and higher in English and higher in social studies. So why was I'm sorry, with these other kids when I was in science? And so I started fighting my way into science rooms where I thought more interesting things were going on, or that where the expectations were higher. And I was told no a lot. But I wheedled my way in, and I'm still wheedling my way in. I'm still saying, no, I don't have a PhD. No, I didn't even major in a science, but I can learn on my feet everything I know I've learned on my feet.
Thanks, Karen. There are two follow-on questions from the two
Okay.
questions I just asked you. So I'll follow on with the person who asked the first one. Your book on the Galapagos Island, is it primarily about people or animals or a mix?
It's everything. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you have it, and it's about Darwin,
Okay.
of course it is, because there weren't that many people. They haven't been able to ascertain that there were people at all in the Galapagos before anyone came from land, from the continents is what I mean to say. They really haven't found much evidence of that. And so when Darwin came with his knowledge of Western science at the time, it really did make a huge impact. And his findings really brought a lot of people to those islands, just to study. Pirates had a big impact too, and so the different ways that people used these islands were really interesting to me. And of course, most of it is uninhabited. Only 3% of the land actually has people on it. So you're going to have to talk about the animals and the environment. But so many people had interactions with that was what was fascinating to me.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
This is more of a comment than a question, but I'll read it. I'd like to offer something I learned that was useful as a freshman long ago at Bowling Green State University, where I was an undergrad. And it helped me taking notes all through graduate school and throughout my entire teaching career to carry multiple ballpoint pens of at least 2 colors, preferably more. My professors used colored chalk to draw in their lectures, and I wanted color for my notes. For all of my years as a student, there were only chalkboards in the classroom. Now I have many colored dry markers for my diagrams and my science lectures.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that writing, how you write has a big impact on your notes. And that if you free yourself, you don't say it has to be any particular way. Do what works for you, whether it's a drawing or or writing. And I'll tell you, whenever I did one of those titles, like the skunk title that looked like the skunk tails, you can tell that that's the point in my writing or my creating a comic where I didn't know what came next. So I sat there and drew some really detailed drawing. And by the time I got to the end of it, I would know where I was going next. So sometimes just switching back and forth from color to color or from drawing to writing can really help your mind go forward. Thank you so much. I love that.
Karen, I think we have time for one more question, and it's just popped into the Q&A box. So the question reads, what route would you recommend for someone who has a background in biology who wants to communicate through art and through writing like you have done? So if our students graduate with a BS in biology, how can they pursue a career like you?
I would take all the writing classes that you can. Now, for me, that wasn't very many. There wasn't that much offered in my college outside of the journalism school, which I was not in. So I took writing for management, I took writing for library studies, just whatever would give me a chance to see other people's writing, which is really important, and what would give me feedback from a teacher or from the other student, which was really important, or just the idea of assignments, write a 500-page article, word article, or, create a diagram or just write captions, all of those different little methods really found that helped me to understand how I wanted to write. Art is a similar thing. It's tricky when you're in college, you're trying to major in bio and the classes are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the art studios are, Tuesday, Friday or something. And you have to kind of cut one class and go to the other, which is also how I spent a lot of my time cutting science and going to art studio. It's a matter of just finding the opportunities. And you will. I know a lot of scientists who also use their art in some way. They're doing, crocheting, or they're doing photography, or they're making videos, and their TikTok is big. There's so many ways now, and there are a lot more writing courses in colleges. You might even find a science writing course.
Thank you again for everything. It's been very informative, and we can't wait to implement this in Biosociety as well. And hopefully we can use this as a resource for all students, and we can kind of team together with faculty on this. Thank you everyone else for joining us today as well.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. Stay safe in the snow.